Hello, welcome to Well Water Sample Collection, a short course. Um, Part one, developing the monitoring network. The main presenters today are going to be Hampton Watkins and Peter Schwartzman. And this is part of the Plymouth's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness project, a grant we received from the state. The general title is Subterranean Resilience, and this we in part represent the Saltwater Intrusion Taskforce. We'll make a few introductions at first. I'm Frank Mann from SEMPA. We're one of the partner groups. To my left is Peter Schwartzman from the Savory Pond Conservancy. Would you like to say a few words, Peter?
Hi, everybody. I'm with the Savory Pond Conservancy. I'm a licensed hydrogeologist, done a bunch of work on Savory Pond and very interested in conserving our groundwater resources in Plymouth.
And to my right is Hampton Watkins from the Six Ponds Improvement Association. Hampton?
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm Hampton Watkins. I'm the chair of the water committee at Six Ponds. And excuse me today, but I have a bit of a cold. I will be working with Peter on the development of the data network for the water collection project.
So Charles Heller is manning the control, so to speak, and we're going to get started now. First, just a brief overview of the agenda of this Zoom meeting. We're going to first go over the project purpose and the background, what's involved specifically in well testing, why is well testing important, how we're developing a monitoring network, our door knocking approach, and conclusions and question and answer will follow. So there will be time to ask questions, but we're going to move kind of rapidly through the program itself. So I think at this point that Mr. Schwartzman is taking the lead.
Well, Frank, maybe you could talk a little bit about this slide, a little bit more about the task force.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Hit that
yes. Sure. About the overall purpose here.
Yes.
So the grant that we've applied for, subterranean resilience, is all about saltwater intrusion. It's part again of a Massachusetts funded municipal vulnerability preparedness grant. We actually have 12 different members of our partnership, including the town, but mostly local environmental nonprofits, including Hampton's group, the Six Pond Improvement Association, Savory Pond Conservancy, Mr. Schwartzman's, our own group, the Southeastern Massachusetts Pine Barrens Alliance. I won't name them all, but we have the League of Women Voters involved, the Herring Pond Wampanoag Tribe, and others. So this MVP grant will, in this phase of well sampling, will use mainly volunteer labor from Plymouth residents to collect information from and about wells, private wells, that are potentially subject to saltwater intrusion. Those volunteers will be contacting well owners to establish what we're calling a monitoring network, collecting water samples from various wells near the coast for salinity testing, measuring the depth to water below land surface in select wells to understand water level elevation, which is very important, and analyzing those to a degree in our own laboratory. And then we'll also have a database of the information collected. Now, the immediate goal of the program, again, is to understand the vulnerability of Plymouth's aquifer to saltwater intrusion. And saltwater intrusion can be associated with many things, but one of them is climate change, changes in temperature and precipitation that affect groundwater recharge, sea level change, also a climate potential effect, and a change in water demand. For example, if you have too many wells pulling the groundwater up, the saltwater can often move in to replace that, especially along the coast. So the long-term goal, of course, is to use good science to recommend the best alternatives to planners, policymakers, and all citizens of Plymouth to mitigate these effects before they become serious. Mr. Schwartzman?
Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of background about the groundwater in Plymouth. All of our drinking water comes from what's called a sole source aquifer, which means it's the only source of water supply for the town. Whether it's private wells or municipal wells, they're all tapping the same aquifer. And it is called the Plymouth Harbor Kingston Duxbury Aquifer. The aquifer is a saturated thickness of sediments. The top is called the water table, where the beginning of saturation, and the bottom is bedrock, where the sand and gravel aquifer formation sits on top of bedrock, which does not move much water, does not transmit much water. Those of you who are associated with ponds or spend time in ponds, most of our ponds are actually expressions of the water table, where the land surface dips below the water table. What you're seeing is groundwater exposed at the surface. So groundwater is not just invisible, it's also supplying many of our ponds. Let's see, the sand and gravel of the aquifer was deposited during the last glacial episode as the glaciers were retreating. And because we have a coastal part of our aquifer, and that's near marine water, we have fresh water that is floating on top of salt water, which is connected to the sea. And that's why we have a potential vulnerability to saltwater intrusion. The saltwater comes in under the fresh water, it forms what's called a wedge. I don't know how many of you got to participate in the saltwater intrusion webinar that was last month, but you probably, if you did, you heard about all of this. Our aquifer is recharged by infiltration of water from rain and melting snow, and that fresh water that recharges the aquifer pushes the salt water out and keeps it from intruding too far inland. But if you pump too hard near the coast, or if there's reduced recharge due to less precipitation or more evaporation of precipitation due to warmer temperatures, that can shift the balance between fresh and salt water. And part of this project is to use models, computer models, to estimate that balance between fresh water and salt water and evaluate the vulnerability to things like sea level rise and additional pumping. What we're doing here is collecting the data, the type of data that this model is going to use to calibrate and to say, okay, are we properly representing reality? So we need to know what reality is. And so that's why we're out sampling wells and measuring water levels. A little bit more background. Just wanted to let you know that we have a series of videos that you should acquaint yourselves with if you're going to be volunteering, so you understand the basic principles. And they're all available on our Facebook page, the Saltwater Intrusion Taskforce Facebook page. But we've got a training video for the actual field work in collecting water samples and measuring water levels. And then we have some basic stuff about what is an aquifer and where's the water table and what is saltwater intrusion. So you can get all that information on our Facebook page. And there's also a pamphlet that you can reach on the internet. All of this stuff is accessible on the internet. Now Hampton's going to talk a little bit about what's involved in the well testing that we're going to be doing.
Right, there are actually two types of well testing that we'll be doing. The first is for a select set of wells along the coast in Plymouth. We'll be seeking to collect and test well water samples. That will provide us some valuable information. At the second phase of the project, what we'll do is we'll actually seek to go into the wells to measure the water level or the depth to water in those wells. That'll give us an indication as to how much water is in the aquifer at that point. And then we can use that in the models to develop better understanding of just what's going on below our feet. The water sample collection port will be water samples for analysis of chloride and specific conductance. The chloride concentration in the wells is the most direct indicator of saltwater intrusion. Increasing the concentration of dissolved solids makes the water more electrically conductive, and we can test for conductivity as a first indicator. And then if there's substantial conductivity, we can then do a detailed analysis of the chloride concentration to find out just exactly how much chloride is in the water. And that gives us a much better indication of what the saltwater interface is, that between the saltwater and freshwater, where the two mix together. A simple field measurement at the well of well water and pond water can be done out in at the time of data collection. But what we'll do is, if there's any indication of higher concentrations of dissolved solids, meaning higher electrical conductivity, we'll bring those samples back in and test them in detail for chloride in the lab. And Peter, I may ask you, as a matter of fact, to pick up, because my voice is not very good for this.
Or no problem. Sorry that you're not feeling well, Hampton.
That's okay.
Okay, so that's the first part, is collecting water samples, and we're going to collect water samples from all the willing, all our entire network. When we get our network together, every well in the network will have a water sample, one or more water samples collected and analyzed for electrical conductance, of EC, I call it, and chloride. But then a subset of those wells, we will be measuring water levels, not all of them, but just a subset. What we're doing is we're measuring the elevation of the water table by dropping a measurement tape down the well. It buzzes when we hit the water table, and we can see how deep it is. And then we know the land surface elevation, and we subtract it, and we get the elevation of the water table. The water table is, always above sea level, unless the well's being pumped or they've really mined the aquifer of water. That would be pretty bad. So the water table is above above sea level, and the extent to which the water table is above sea level will tell us how much fresh water there is to sort of push the salt water out. That's the reason we want to measure the elevation. We want to know how much freshwater pressure there is to keep the salt water at bay. We can also, once we have those elevations, we can put them on a map, we can contour them, and we can use them to assess the vulnerability of the aquifer at that location, the saltwater intrusion. Again, how much pressure is there to keep the water at bay? The data will also be used, or can also be used, to calibrate the groundwater flow model that UMass Amherst is going to be working on as part of this project. So why is this important? That's something you're going to get asked when you're out in the field knocking on doors, trying to get access to people's wells and water samples. So as was already mentioned, testing wells, getting this data gets us important information for policymakers, and also to educate the citizens of Plymouth about what is the current condition of our aquifer and where things might be heading. We can use this information and the groundwater model that's under development to recommend actions that can be taken to reduce vulnerability to saltwater intrusion. Without collecting this kind of information, we're kind of flying blind. We don't know what areas are more vulnerable, what are less vulnerable, so it's harder to make informed decisions. And even if we do have this knowledge, it doesn't mean good decisions will be made. We have to keep on it, and we have to be letting people know that this is an important thing, letting our regulators know that it's important. So we want to be prepared and ready for sea level rise, which is already happening, and changes in recharge, which will happen with warming, which is already happening, and new pumping, which we need because population is growing. So we need to be prepared for those changes that are coming down the pipe. So we're going to develop a monitoring network. The monitoring network is going to emphasize wells that are close to the coast, because that's where saltwater intrusion tends to happen. We've already identified a bunch of candidate wells and their locations. We've used a bunch of different data sources to identify them. They're mostly privately owned, and the well owners have received letters explaining the project. So theoretically, if they've read their letter, they already are aware of this, but we don't know that for sure. We're going to approach those residents by showing up at their house and knocking on the door and seeing if they're willing to cooperate. And so far, in my experience, walking around Ellisville, many people are willing and happy to assist. And that feels pretty good when you meet someone like that, and that's their position. So we're going to go over the door knocking approach, and then we're going to go through a sample script, which I think I will be the door knocker, and we'll need to volunteer. Hampton, if you're up for it, but if not, we'll pick someone else from our current audience to be the homeowner.
I will be the grumpy homeowner.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you'll probably be wanting to get rid of me so you can get back to your hot soup and your TV show. So anyhow, rules of the road. So we'll be using volunteers, and we're soliciting voluntary assistance from these homeowners. We're not selling anything. We're not recommending they do anything. And we're not doing any other activity but asking if they're willing to participate. As always, if you knock on doors, you don't know how you're going to be received, so you need to be, aware and ready to respond however is necessary. So surprises can occur. If you're asked to leave, you should do so immediately. If there are signs saying no soliciting or that no trespassing, not allowed on the property, then just don't go on the property. And but it is important. We'll be giving you a list of properties to visit, and so if you don't visit the property because you can't get on it or you're unwelcome, make sure you write that down on the list, so we know what happened. It might be that if we contact somebody directly because you couldn't get on their property, they're still willing, and we can sort of have a plan B if we know what happened when you were out there in the field. We want to work in pairs during initial visits. From a safety perspective, we decided that's the best way to go. We're not parking in people's driveways. You park on the street and then sort of walk around in a reasonable radius and then move your car and do some more. Always go to the front door, not a back door around somebody's house. We do have a script that we put together that you don't have to follow word for word at all, but we put it together to sort of demonstrate what talking points you're likely to use. And then you can sort of personalize it yourself, but we wanted at least to have something to guide your initial exposure to what we're doing. If the well owner is amenable and you're out there and they're showing you your well, or they're willing to show you well, it's good to get a picture or two. And there's information that you'll be asking or collecting when you talk to the well owner. And we have these well inventory data sheets that you can use to write down this information, and we keep track of things that way. So we'll be showing you those sheets as well. What are you going to take with you when you door knock? We have all this stuff available at the lab. You will have that list of addresses and names, so you know where you're going. You'll need a clipboard and a pen to write things down. The well inventory data sheets, and either some spare paper, or you can write on the back if there's some notes you want to make that are not covered in the inventory sheet. We'll have either copies of the original letter or a pamphlet that you can leave with them if they never open the letter, or if they're not home and you want to let them know that we were there. And we think it would be good to have yellow stickies or something, so that you can put a note on there with maybe a phone number or something. We'll give you that information later, what best to say on that. Bring your phone so you can take pictures. And another nice thing about phones is that they do have GPS. Either you can collect coordinates then, or on our next visit when we actually go to sample the well, we can collect latitude and longitude coordinates, but at some point we're going to want to do that. And then just to show them what we're doing, you can bring a well sample bottle and a picture of the tape measure that we use to go down the well so people can see what we're talking about. When you're done for the day, your volunteer team, bring back everything to the lab and we'll keep track of it. So what should you expect when you go out there? For one thing, not everyone is going to be home or interested or willing. Don't feel bad about that. You know, people have their reasons. Some people are going to ask, why should I care? Why should I do that? And we'll get to that answer soon enough. People may express concern about going in their well. I mean, very, you know, this is a very basic thing, clean water supply. So we need to be sensitive to that. And people will also might also ask about whether their information is going to be made public. I mean, what if they have a salty well, or you know, do they want the people to know about that? So we also that is not necessary that their information goes public. We'll talk about that in a bit as well. And then people may ask you technical questions or other questions that you can't answer, and that's okay. We can answer those questions, and your role is just to engage the homeowner and get them interested, and you can refer them to Frank, who and on his contact information is on the letter and will be on any kind of pamphlet, and they can ask him programmatic questions, and if they have more detailed technical questions, Frank will refer them to project scientists, which are me and Hampton and possibly others. So those are some of the things you can expect when you do your door knocking. So we're doing great time-wise, I believe. I don't know what time. Oh, 20 minutes in, and we're already at the script. And so let's pretend that Frank and I are out doing our canvassing or our door knocking, and I'll try not to read this word for word. And Hampton, you be the grouchy homeowner.
Happily.
All right, so here we go. Hi, my name is Peter Schwartzman, and this is Frank Mann, and we are volunteers with the Plymouth Saltwater Intrusion Taskforce, and we are talking to homeowners about our project. If you're the homeowner, I think you probably got a letter about this back in December or January. Are you aware of this project? Did you receive any information, or have you heard about it in the news?
No, I really don't recall hearing anything about it. Can you tell me some more?
Yeah, Frank has been actually doing the publicity for this, so he can tell you a little bit about it and where you can find more information.
Yeah, if you want more information besides what we can tell you now, the Plymouth Saltwater Intrusion Task Force actually has a Facebook page called Plymouth SWI Task Force, or you can visit the website of the Southeastern Massachusetts Pine Barren Alliance, or our Facebook site, or give me a call as well. My email is dogd@aol.com. There's a lot of information out there. There have been news stories in the newspaper. We've sent out letters to homeowners. We thought we sent one to you, but any information you'd like to have to assure you of the intent of what we have going on, we'd be glad to provide.
And the reason that we're doing this is because, you know, we're sitting on top of a sole source aquifer. The town of Plymouth gets all its water from a single aquifer, and this aquifer supplies our water supply, it supplies ponds, it supplies streams, and coastal portions of the aquifer are actually at risk to saltwater intrusion. That's where salt water starts to move inland from the ocean into the aquifer. The reason that there's a risk is because sea levels are rising and groundwater withdrawals are increasing. Both of those things can draw salt water into the aquifer. What we're trying to do is get some baseline information about the state of the aquifer along the coast, so we know where it's vulnerable, where it seems to be resilient to possible forces that might cause saltwater intrusion. And under the project, we're going to have, we'll be having trained task force volunteers coming around and collecting data from wells to tell us more about that, the state of the groundwater resource indicated by the wells.
So you're telling me that my well is at risk?
Well, all wells along the coast are potentially at risk, but we don't know to the extent to which your well may or may not be at risk until we make the measurement. And I think that this might be something that you're interested in. I'm hoping that that most well owners along the coast are interested to know, you know, the state of their well and whether it's seeing any signs of intrusion or whether it seems to be pretty resilient. It's worth knowing that so that, you know, for instance, if there are any proposals to develop groundwater in your area, if you know if your well is at risk or resilient, you should know. That would help you decide how you want to respond to a proposal like that. So knowing what you have could give you a more sense of security about where things are going.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, you know, go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, but I'm not at risk right now.
No, there's no evidence. I mean, if you're not tasting salt in your water, you're not at extreme risk. But you know, any coastal well is potentially at risk due to sea level rise or any new pumping. So we're trying to get a baseline so that we know what areas are more resilient and what areas are more sensitive.
Okay, so this is some sort of proactive study that's looking forward. All
yeah,
right.
We're hoping that it would, the town of Plymouth is involved, as Frank mentioned, and we're hoping that it will guide policy decisions to protect the aquifer into the future.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So the other thing that the data is going to be used for, you might be wondering how we're going to make, you know, what will inform those policy decisions. And that is that the University of Massachusetts at Amherst is involved in this study. And based on hydrogeologic data about the groundwater system, they're going to develop a computer model of the groundwater flow system, which can be used to assess saltwater intrusion potential with rising sea level and new pumping and all that kind of thing. So anyhow, to collect the data that we need, we're looking for homeowners with wells. So are you the homeowner or are you a renter or?
No, I'm a homeowner, but I'm here only seasonally.
Oh, okay. And do you know if there's an existing well on your property?
Yeah, there is a well that was here when we bought the property back in 1980, and we've just continued to use it.
Okay, so the well is currently active. Do you use it for your drinking water or just for irrigation, or what do you use it for?
And we use it just for whatever you use in the house, drinking water, washing, so on, and then for watering the lawns if they need it.
Okay, yeah, I know that in some areas where the town has provided water, people kept their wells and they just use it for irrigation, or they left the well in the ground, but they're not using it at all, but it's still there. In any case, that would work for us because we're looking for wells that we can access. Well, do you happen to know how deep it is?
I haven't a clue.
Okay, that's true for a lot of people. There might be some records with the town. We can try to look it up, but otherwise we probably won't know. But yeah, obviously, since we're using it, it still has a pump in it. Is the pump sitting on top of the well, or is it down? Is it not visible, which would mean it would be in the well?
The pump is out back in the pump house. And
oh, okay, so it's visible up. It's not in the well.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right, that's very helpful. So what we're trying to do is get the assistance of private well owners who would allow us to collect data a couple times over the next year from their wells. And and there's two kinds of data we'd like to collect. One is to measure any salinity in the groundwater, and the other one is to measure the water level in the well, so we can know how high the water level is above sea level. To do salinity is very simple. All we want to do is ask you if we can fill up a sample bottle, either from a spigot or your sink. And what we'll do is we'll measure the electrical conductance of that water, which tells us something about how much salinity is in the water, how much dissolved salts. But we'll also take it back to the lab and we'll measure chloride. So very simple. We're just asking, you know, if you could fill a sample bottle just like this one here from your well.
Can, from any faucet in the house?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but the one thing that that matters is that if you have a water softener system, we would hope to try to get a sample before the water from the well goes through that system, because it tends to add chloride to the water, and that wouldn't be a representative sample. So do you have a water system, a treatment system?
No, no, not at all.
Okay. All right, well then that solves that problem. In that case, yeah, it could be from any faucet in your house or outside. You know, if we come by during the winter and your faucets are closed off, you know, we can get it you could fill it for us from your sink faucet. Anything works.
Okay.
And that's because chloride doesn't go away, it stays in the water. For some wells, and I don't know if your well will be one of them or not, we're going to want to measure depth to water in the well. And that's a fairly simple process. The well has to be set up so that we can get this specific type of measuring tape down the well. And the measuring tape is made of inert materials, just like the electrical wires that go down your well. It's pretty much the same type of materials. There's a little stainless steel probe on the bottom, and when it touches the water, it beeps, and then we can get a measurement off the graduated tape. Here's a picture of what it looks like. Pretty simple thing, just measuring tape with a probe on it. And if your well is set up to allow access, and most of them are, then we would possibly ask you if you could measure the water level. And yeah,
You aren't going to pollute my well in any way, are you?
no, like I was saying, the sounder itself, it's called a well sounder, is made of inert materials. You know, you already have metal and wire and plastic cover of wire down in your well. There's nothing different about the materials in a well sounder. And we also sanitize the sounder with a dilute bleach solution before we put it in the well, and then again when we take it out. So we're taking all precautions. This is a very common procedure. It's done all over in hydrologic studies without any problem. So there's really not a water quality concern for your well.
Okay.
Like I said, we're probably going to come maybe twice over the course of the year and ask you for a sample and measure perhaps measure the depth to water, and then we're going to have the data, and we'll share all that data with you, so you'll have a record of the depth to water in your well and what the salinity is, if any. We would like to be using data to educate the public, but we won't share any of the data unless you're comfortable with us doing so. If you're not comfortable, we'll just use it internally for the study. But if you are comfortable with, you know, showing your data, and you may want to wait till you see what the data is, but then we'll be making maps for the online project that show where we sampled and what we found. I mean, I personally think that we're likely to find that almost all the water is pretty fresh, and so I don't think there'll be any negative information, but we can discuss that whether you want it shared or not at any time.
Okay.
So if you don't have the letter anymore, here's a copy of the letter or a pamphlet. Do you have any questions? And do you think that you might be willing and interested to participate in the project?
let me think about it, but there's contact information on the letter, somebody I can reach out to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, you know, if you want to know more about the project itself, Frank Mann can tell you. And if you want to know more about the technical aspects, Peter or Hampton Watkins can tell you. I myself or Hampton. And you know, I'm really interested. I'd love to see your well if you have a minute and you wouldn't mind showing it to me. Is that something we could do?
Sure, let's walk around back. It's like I said, it's in the pump house, and I'll go open it up. Let me go in and get the key, and I'll meet you at the back door.
Very good. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
All right. So that was that. That went really well. He wasn't too scary. And this next slide tells you some of the things that you might observe when you're out there about the well. And you'll see when we get to the data collection sheet that there's room for you to put that in there. So, you know, you might observe whether the well is above ground or below ground, like in a vault. Sometimes there's a cover that you have to lift and climb down into a well, and you know, kind of stomp on a few spiders. And what is the well casing made of? Is it PVC or is it steel? Is the pump above ground or is it not visible, which means it's a submersible pump that's in the well? It's in some cases, if the pump is above ground, it can be more difficult to access the well to get a water level measurement. So maybe that well is only good for getting a water quality sample. And that's why that's an important thing to ask about or note. What type of cap does the well have on it? I believe you'll see in the training video that we have pictures of the types of caps. Both of them are accessible for the well sounder or the measuring tape. But if it's a compression cap, it needs to have this little plastic plug that you can remove. So you'll see that in the training video. If the homeowner lets you take a photo with your phone, make sure you write down the date and time of the photo, because when you get back, you're not going to remember which photo goes to which well. I guess actually I learned recently that you can add a title to a photo on an iPhone, maybe on others too. So that would be helpful to title your photo if you have that option. We already talked about the question about the water treatment system. We discussed that in the example. And then there might be some basic questions that that you as the door knocker can answer. Maybe Hampton, you probably asked some of them, but why don't we go through this and you can ask me these questions, Hampton, and I'll attempt to answer them.
Okay, grumpy homeowner back here. How often would you think you'd come around to check on my well, to do whatever you're going to do?
Well, let's see. It's June now. We'll probably want to come for a summer sample and a winter sample. So pretty soon after this, you know, within the next month, we'll be here to get a sample, and then maybe 6 months out, you come back.
Yeah, remember I'm here only seasonally, and we shut this place down. So
yeah, right.
You might
Okay.
want to adjust your schedule somehow if you need a couple of samples.
Okay, that's fine. And yeah, we can definitely take a note of that and adjust accordingly. Maybe you could tell me what seasons, if you're comfortable, tell me what seasons you're here, or I will get your contact information on our form and we can call you and check in with you later about that.
Okay, we're usually here from April till probably the beginning of November when we go ahead and go back south. Other it's a little earlier.
Okay. But that we can work with that.
All right. The other thing is, do I need to be here when you're sampling?
You know, not only if you feel more comfortable that way. If there's an outdoor spigot, we can just open it up and get a sample. Our volunteers will be trained in measuring the water level in your well. So if you want to observe that, then we'll set it up for when you're here. But otherwise, if you're comfortable with us coming, on the first visit, you can show us the well. You can observe it if you like. And then on the second visit, if you're comfortable, we could do it on our own. It's completely up to you.
Okay, it'd just be good for me if you left a little note or something if you came by and no one was here. I don't mind you going out to the spigot that I showed you by the pump house, but just let us know that you've come and gone.
No problem. We can do that. I'll make a note of that.
Okay. And we've been here, like I said, since the 80s. And there's been no problem. I mean, I'm glad that somebody's looking out into the distant future, but it feels kind of useless to me. Why should I be interested in participating in this study?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I mentioned before, what we're trying to do is get a baseline measurement of existing conditions in the aquifer and figure out where things are more vulnerable and more resilient. And that's going to help us with better management of our water resources. As a hydrogeologist personally, I know that when we're trying to make decisions about management, we often wish we had data that we don't have. And so having this data will enable the town to make better decisions on how to manage water resources in the future.
Okay, and if you find something, will my data be made publicly available in any way? I want to know if that's going to happen. Particularly if you find something concerning.
Sure, and absolutely, it's your choice. If you allow it, we'll likely do it because we do want to do some citizen science and we want to show the public what we're doing and how public involvement can help guide decisions. But if you'd rather that you keep your data private, we'll definitely respect that. And you might want to wait until you see your data to decide whether it should be private or not. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And like I said, are there any? I already mentioned the contamination of the well. Are there any other risks that I should be aware of before I give the okay to go into my well?
Sure. So on risks are extremely low on very rare instances where the wiring that goes down to the well was left by, say, the driller or the well installer in a real messy way. It's possible that our well sounder can get sort of tangled up in that wiring. This typically happens above the water level, and we can usually get it out. But if we can't get it out, what we usually do is just recommend tying it off and leaving it as just like one of the other wires that goes down the well. So again, it's the same material as those other wires. There's no change in water quality risk if we were to leave it there. But if that happened, and again, it's very low probability, and you were uncomfortable with us leaving it there, we do have the resources to have a pump person come and get it out. So you'd never be left uncovered. If you were uncomfortable, if on the really rare instance that it did get caught up and we couldn't get it out, we can get it out with a pump contractor coming by. That's the general gist of it. We do have a licensed hydrogeologist on the project, and he can tell you more about that if you like. I think you're muted, sir.
I'll have to give you some consideration, and discuss it with my other half before we move forward. But thanks. You've provided a lot of information, and I understand, I think, what you're about. So appreciate you coming by, and we're certainly happy to provide water samples. And if we're not here, you can just use the spigot out by the pump house.
That's great. That's really helpful. Just before I go, I'd like to just get a little bit of information on contact information from you so that we can reach out to you later. So, you know, I already have your name and I've got your address here and got your, you know, what, could you give us, if you're comfortable, phone number to reach you, home or cell number and email address?
Sure.
Yeah.
888-888-8888.
Oh man, how much did you pay for that number?
A lot less than you'd pay for 666-666-6666.
Oh, great. And let's see, anything else I need to know? I think I've already asked you all these questions and I've got a picture, so I think we're good to go with that. I'll just let you know that there is, when we do come back, if you're interested in the program, we have a form that you authorize us to collect the samples that we'll ask you to sign, and it also is the place where you decide whether you're going to allow public, showing any data to the public. So we'll deal with that once you've made your decision, and we'll bring it with us when we come for our next sample. That's about it for now. We really appreciate it, and thanks for your time.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Oh, one more question. What acting school did you both go to? I would recommend it.
The Frank Mann School of Acting.
I've just been watching a lot of Netflix over the pandemic, so I'd like to get some feedback from the group here on how you think that went and whether some things could have been done differently. The one thing that is always a little tricky is the thing about risk to the well, and we're still kind of working out the best way to answer that question. We'll probably have a bit more input on that by the time you guys are going out to do some door knocking. But any other things that people observed here in the group on this process and what went well, what could have been done better?
No, I think it went very well. I think it was more succinct than it appears to be. And as you said, and as those people watching this video will understand, as you become more familiar, or as you familiarize yourself with some of the information we're providing, in addition to this, you're going to do it your own way. There are just certain areas we'll stress, as you've stressed, that for example, you have to have the sign off to protect them and us. You have to give them full information. But in general, I think it's a very good foundation for people to move forward on this.
Great. And the other training, when you watch the well video or the training video, a subgroup of volunteers are going to be the ones that actually go out in the field and get the samples and measure depth of water in the well. And there's a training video that I mentioned that's up on Facebook that you should watch, just so you have a real visual sense of what we're doing. So when you go talking to people, you really know what you can visualize exactly what we're talking about. So watching that video and maybe the other videos will really help you be able to be comfortable with what you're asking about, and have a visualization of what we're doing. There's also, this is something you'll get with the inventory form, is instructions on how to fill out the different fields of the form. So that will inform you about that. And there's going to be a separate in-person training on measuring wells and taking samples that will happen within the next, we may be having it in 2 weeks, we may be having it later. We'll let you know on that. So the conclusions, Anthony, you wrote these conclusions. Why don't you wrap this one up?
All right, thank you. Remember, the project is staffed by volunteers. It's you and your compatriots. The data collection requires that we have voluntary engagement of the property owners. not just the residents of the house, but those who actually own the property and the well. The data is essential for the success of the project. Without it, we're not going to be able to provide the information back to the town and the state that we need in order to protect the aquifer and make good policy decisions going forward. Your assistance in collecting the needed data is tremendously appreciated, as is the assistance of those who own the wells. And if you don't feel comfortable door knocking, let us know, because there are other volunteer opportunities available in the project, and we can get you going on some of those. So with that, I will say it is time for questions. And
Yeah, I have a question for ourselves, and that is, what we didn't cover is, what if you knock on a door and it's a renter as opposed to the owner? The renter is unlikely to know very much, and the renter can't grant permission. They can grant permission if to come on the property, if they're comfortable, if only the owner grants the permission. So you can still ask them if they're comfortable doing this, but you'll need to emphasize that you need to get authorization from the property owner. Are there any other considerations that we might put forward in the case where it's a renter occupying the residence?
Yeah, the consideration that I would say is if it's a rental property, there may be a management company in between the renter and the owner. So the renter may refer us to the management company, and then we have to make that leap back to the owner.
That's a good point. I mean, we should ask the renter for contact information from the owner. We do have contact information in our database, but we don't know for sure if it's accurate. I believe it is on the sheets that you're going to have that have the addresses and the names and everything. So it's probably worth getting some info from the occupant about that, and we'll use the data we have and that to be able to reach out to that person. Another thing that might come up is a person could say, well, we have a well, but we don't use it. We never use it, we never touch it. And then the implication might be, is it still useful to the study? And the answer is potentially yes. Or let's say the well, the pump, they've disconnected the electricity to the pump. The pump's still sitting in the well, but they don't use it anymore. We can still use that well to measure the water level, which is great. And if the pump has been removed, we actually have a sampling device that we can put down the well and grab a sample of water that's sitting in the well. So those kind of questions, is the pump in the well? And even if it's not, it doesn't mean it's a lost cause, because we have what's called a bailer. It's basically a little pipe that you throw down. I think there might be a picture of it on the website, on Facebook, and we can grab a sample that way, and we can measure the water level. So actually, a well without a pump is not a problem. And there's no risk of getting our sounder tangled in any wires, so that's nice as well. If the well is only used for irrigation, that's fine. In fact, you'd think that the well owner would be less concerned about any kind of water quality or impacts if they've gone onto town water and they use it for irrigation. When you're walking around, if you're seeing fire hydrants on the street, you can be pretty sure that there's town water around. And some of these, but that doesn't mean that people didn't keep their well. Some people prefer to have their well because the water is not chlorinated, or they don't want to pay for water to irrigate their gardens, so they may still have a well. There was another thing I was thinking about as a consideration, but I think that's. Can anyone else think of things that that might be little twists to?
Well, what I I received a call from someone on Saquesh, and one of the things they did that I appreciated was they said their well would be open to be tested and their information, but they gave me the name of another person in the area that would also be willing. So sometimes we could get referrals from people. They might say, I know I don't, or I willing, and this person might be willing as well.
That's great.
And then because they know that have that inside information, we have a much higher likelihood of getting the information we want from that other person.
Yeah, that's really great. And I've done that too. When I've gone up to houses, they say, well, I don't have a well, but my neighbor does. And you know, our databases are not perfect. We've tried to identify all the wells in the area, but we may not have. And so you may just end up saying, oh, here's a new one. We're going to go knock on that door. So that could be very helpful. And another thing that you might be thinking about when you're walking around and looking at other people have wells is in some cases there might be like the major aquifer in the area is tied in to is connected to marine water, and near the coast the water level is going to be closer to sea level, like higher than sea level but closer to sea level. If you're walking around and maybe you have a phone app that has Google Earth on it and you can see what the elevation is where you are, say you're 150 feet up and somebody says, yeah, I've got a well and it's 50 feet deep. Well, in that case, you know that well is not tapping the sea level aquifer, the aquifer that we're worried about intrusion. That well is going to be tapping what we call a perched aquifer. It's when water, you know, the rainfall that trickles into the ground accumulates above a clay layer or something, and it perches above the clay layer. It is not going to be useful for our study because saltwater intrusion happens in the sea level aquifer, or which happens to be our regional aquifer. So, you know, if you had that much information from a well owner and you knew your elevation based on a reasonable source like Google Earth, you might say, oh, well, thank you very much. You know, your well is not even in the aquifer that's connected to the sea. Good for you. So that's another thing that I noticed when I was in the field, that there were a couple wells that were tapping a perched aquifer, and they wouldn't really be useful for the study.
So are we ready to take questions from the audience? I think there's, I think I see a Ms. Stoll that's very eager to ask a question. You're muted.
I was wondering, like you say, you already have a database of people that you want to question. Like how far from the coast does that database go?
Yeah, we live within a mile of the coast, but really we're emphasizing the wells closer than that. But our database looked as far inland as a mile.
Yeah,
So you have a list of all the people that are a mile from the coast that you have listed that you want people knocking on doors to ask them permission?
Yeah, there are a couple public data sources that we use to compile our database. One is the town's parcel database, and in the parcel database, they state whether they're on what their sources of utilities are, whether it's electrical, gas, water, and so if the person is not on town water, then they likely have a well. So we did a screen of the parcel database that way. There's also a public state database of well information that we use to identify wells. And then there were a few other studies that had some wells identified that we read and pulled those wells out of the study. So those are the sources that we use to compile our list of possible homes with wells.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Denise, think, since you're familiar with the area, think Taylor Ave and the houses up above Taylor Ave, in Manomet Point Road, one on Manomet Ave, Stage Point Road, over close to where Cheryl and Marty used to live. Those are the sorts of close to the coast, close to sea level spots. Ellisville Road, Center Hill Road, Indian Brook, they're hugging the coast, and down into Cedarville hugging the coast. So those are the sorts of locations that in south of downtown, and then Outrider Way on Long Beach, and clearly all of Long Beach and all of Saquish and Gurnett, are parts of the study area. We're a bit sparse for wells in North Plymouth because that's fairly well served by town water, but there are a few along North Plymouth and up to Cottage Park.
But
One
you're
of the-
talking a mile west of the coast.
Think
Right.
just as a rough thing,
Yeah.
everything east of 3A.
Mhm. Okay.
Well, one of the things that comes out of Denise's questions, at least for me, is that people are often looking to relevance to their own situation. And that's an opportunity, I believe, to stress that one of the reasons to do this is to understand where and how we could possibly have additional municipal wells or not have them, because we know that overall the effect on the inland areas, on people that like Denise live on ponds, there could be an effect there as well, a ripple effect. Once you're taking too much water from one area or not taking some water from one area, you're looking to take it from another. And so there's real relevance, as again, this is a unified aquifer, the ponds, the streams, and the ocean, all connected to our aquifer. And I think we stress that, but you can't stress that enough, especially in this sole source aquifer situation.
Unfortunately, my Google Earth is not working, but if it were right now, I would share my screen and show you guys the wells, the parcels that we've identified to knock on doors, and I would show you we made some polygon boundaries of search areas that include Cedarville, Center Hill, what else? Portage Park and the town, Ellisville, Indian Brook, Manomet, and let's see, Poverty Point and Rocky Point, and then the Saquish and Gurnett areas. So we've got maybe, I don't know, 8 different areas that we'll be sending door knockers out to try to, get wells for our network. I've already done most of Ellisville, so but we still need a bit more work in Ellisville, and we've got some already assigned, but as we get firm names for volunteers, we'll be creating the groups and making the assignments, and possibly Frank, when he makes this video, can add a couple pictures of kind of how we assembled the information. I can work with you, Frank, to do that if you like.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Well, any other questions before Frank wraps it up?
So again, the wrap up is basically any additional questions you have, any assurances you need. If you'd like to see materials that we have already, or you think there's additional materials that you need to be provided, let us know. Again, we have the Facebook site, Plymouth SWI Task Force. If you'd like to stop by and visit the headquarters of SEMPA, which is essentially the headquarters now of the MVP project, we're at 158 Center Hill Road. My email again is dogd@aol.com. And I would just like to stress that, as was emphasized in this program, this is a complete volunteer effort. And the volunteers that do this work are helping their neighbors throughout the town get some very valuable information that could help us all going forward in this uncertain age of climate change. So I would say, unless anyone else has anything to say, stay tuned for additional training programs. There is right now on April 10th at 1 p.m., it's a Sunday, that this training will be repeated. And sometime in May, it looks like, we're going to have a hands-on training on site in the equipment and actual practices that we talked about briefly here. So on behalf of the Plymouth Saltwater Intrusion Task Force and the MVP project, Hampton and Peter, Charles, Denise, and all the thousands of others on this Zoom webinar, I want to thank you for attending and let us know what's going on. Let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Good night.